Welcome to the third episode of Back to School with PC. Today's show is all about Indian languages, literature, and their socio-political impact. To speak to us about it, we have Priya Kodidala. Incidentally, she's an alum of BITS Pilani as well and holds a degree in mathematics and engineering. Post graduating from college, Priya pivoted to work on policy research and in the social impact consulting space. I first discovered Priya on the internet through her passion project, Telugu Archive. She spends countless hours researching in public libraries and the internet to help the world rediscover and make sense of Telugu literature, art, and history through her Instagram handle and her first post column. Welcome to the show, Priya.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
We are looking at a good show today. So let's start off with your formative years, maybe going back to the beginning to your school days. What do you remember from your growing up years?
I grew up in Hyderabad and I think I had a pretty standard childhood. Growing up, I was very shy and studious. I really liked reading and I read everything that I could get my hands on. I think that's how I started reading Telugu literature, and I'm not sure how much of it would count as literature because it started with reading Chandamama magazines or Balamitra magazines in the local library. Most of it happened over summer because that's when I would go to my Amama's place, and then right next to the house there was a Mandala Granthalayam, which is the block library, and it had just this particular shelf of Chandamama and Balamitra magazines. Next to it was the Ratchabanda, which it is supposed to be a community space, but it's mostly men who hang out. So I would read Chandamama magazines and Balamitra magazines at the library, and then also read newspapers while I was spending time in that community space because it's not every day that someone has time to be able to read a newspaper. I think that's how it started.
Okay. So Chandamamas were like your first introduction to reading. Was it that you just walked up to a public library by yourself, or was it your grandmother who took you there? How did it happen?
So our house was next to the Rachapanda, which was attached to the library. So it made obvious sense to go there. And it also meant that I was not at home and pestering my mom or my grandmom. It was not a nudge towards reading, it was a nudge towards there is a community space and we might as well leave the kid there so that life gets a little easier for us.
I guess it was convenient for everyone involved that you went to the library. So, is there something that you remember, like a story or a poem or a book from the time that you read there that actually had a huge impact on you?
I was this very shy kid who kept to herself all the time. People started sending books if they found that, oh, this might be a children's book that this kid might be interested in. That's how I came across Mahaprasthanam, written by Sri Sri, and that was major exposure to what can be termed as literature. When I read Mahaprasthanam is when I understood it moves you in a way that you wouldn't have experienced till that movement. From that point, I have read multiple things over the years, but if you ask me at any point of time, what is that book that really affects you, it would always come to Mahaprasthanam. And I don't think I'm the only one who would say that. Within Mahaprasthanam, there was this particular poem called Desha Charitralu, which is the history of nations. It played a major role or sort of like trigger a thought in me in being able to imagine the world around me and to be able to understand it better. Because the kind of perspective that it throws before you can really shake up the foundations of everything that is told by people around us.
How do you think that's actually shaped you? You did mention that it shook up your foundations, right? Could you give an example to our listeners? What was the impact that the book had on you?
I think it changed the way I approached reading or what I wanted to read. There is something beautiful or very impactful that one of the lines within that poem, he says, Taj Mahal kattindevaru kadu, raletina koolilevaru ani. So what it means is that don't ask who built the Taj Mahal, but ask who were the workers who lifted the stones to build it. Now, everything that we're told about our history is all about the kings and queens and their wars and pride. It's filled with stuff like that. and to think about history or think about society in terms of how do you understand the person next to you, or how do you understand your own placement in the society. Those are very important. That poem really put forward that particular seed in my mind.
Thinking about the kind of impact that you've had reading literature, would you say that it gives an alternate perspective to people in terms of looking at the world very differently from how we are asked or maybe forced to look at it?
It not only gives you a different perspective, but it also puts together the perspective that you can relate to your own, right? I mean, that is the reason why emotions, for instance, I think there is this quote by James Baldwin where he talks about how when you read, you realize that what happened to you did not happen to you first, and there are many others that it happened. And there is this kind of beauty when you read something and then you sort of are able to articulate what you're going through. I think it works both ways.
Yeah. And maybe just taking a step back, you did mention that you first encountered reading when you moved to your native town, and you went into a public library and you picked up a Chandamama, which is basically in Telugu, which is a native language. What is the role of a language in general? Do you think I read in English to a Telugu or a Hindi? Do you think there's a difference in terms of how I would perceive it?
I think so, because languages are inherently shaped by people's experiences, right? The same difference, I mean, the same word or the same expression will sound very differently when you say it in English, when you say it in Hindi, or when you say it in Vijayawada versus Hyderabad versus Nellore versus Kadapa, because the nuances are so much more. So, in that way, I think languages hold that key to understanding that particular socio-cultural context. That's also why a lot of translations say that they struggle, or if you go ahead and say that when you're translating something, you're creating something new. You're never 100% translating something from one language to another. You're creating entirely new, because a particular language has its own way of expressing what it wants to say.
Fair. Yeah, but maybe if I play the devil's advocate here and think of a language, the base premise for any language is communication, right? So imagine if everyone speaks the same language globally, wouldn't it make the world be a lot more easier for people to communicate? And
I don't know how to answer that. This is an example that comes off my head, but let's say there is a scientific proposal that these are the kind of nutrients that you would need for your body,
Mhm.
but and this is all you need to go on and sustain a new kind of life. Wouldn't it make sense for everyone to just inject these particular vitamins or nutrients and then, not bother about what is it that flavor that is in the food, or why is, biryani in Hyderabad so different from what it is in Lucknow?
I buy that argument because it's not just about efficiency, right? Like you said, languages bring out socio-political context, and there are languages which could help describe a certain situation much more beautifully than another one. So I guess there's place for languages in this world, and it's
Yeah,
not about communication.
yeah, because what is the kind of stories that languages carry are so different and are so rooted. Because if you listen to a song that is common across, agricultural fields in the Krishna district, it might not be the same across fields in Rayalaseema, for instance, right? They carry voices of the people from that particular region. In Telugu, there is also a concept of Srila Padalu, which means that words used by women, but is not part of the common vocabulary that is the Telugu language. Again, cuts across communities, caste, region, religion, and so on.
True. With globalization, standardization of languages, even if I have to think of cinema or the kind of language that we use, even if it's Telugu in our curriculum, it's being standardized. So there's some amount of context that is lost, right? What do you have to say about it?
I think that is unfortunate. Imagine a kid walking into a class and not being able to understand what is being spoken in the school while also identifying it as their own language. For me, that is not how it should be.
Do you see a middle road here, or do you think dialect should be included in a kid's learning, or the mother tongue the way it is? Imagine I'm from Telangana. The way I speak Telugu is the way I should learn Telugu, or there should be a middle ground about all of this?
I think that is a very tricky space because sure there is diversity. There's just so many fragments or there's so many variations of a particular language. But there definitely is a more workable middle ground to reach than completely saying that this is the one particular standard that applies to everyone who identify with this particular language.
This leads us to your passion project, which is Telugu Archive. I actually came across this handle earlier this year and I found it pretty fascinating because it's one of those unique handles that actually celebrates people's nativity. How did you end up starting the whole page and deciding to invest time into all of this?
Right. I mean, someone who grew up reading Telugu literature, right? The stuff that I have been exposed to, I always found it very powerful and progressive. The way I felt when I was reading something in Telugu was simply not the way I felt when I was reading good English prose. That's one. And I also realized that a lot of people around me did not stand where I was. And that also meant that when I find something extremely interesting and intriguing, I can't just jump out of my bubble and say, did you read this? What do you think about this? So when I moved to Delhi, I found that even more stark. And that's when I thought Instagram is a good platform to be able to share what I'm learning and what I wanted to talk about.
Cool. Referring to this one line that you mentioned from Sri about Taj Mahal and its workers. So there's a lot of political and social context to it. Do you think art in general has to be political?
Yes, I think the short answer is that any kind of art or creation is inherently political. And you can also take literature or history or culture or art, and all of these are interlinked with each other, which means that a piece of art or a piece of literature or any creation you take, it is deeply rooted in the kind of socio-political context that it is set in. For example, there is a certain context which gave rise to a Sri Sri, which gave rise to a Mahaprasthanam, or which gave rise to a Chalam. So I think it is important to understand what is the context in which they came out in.
Would you say that this is what you've tried deciphering in a lot of the posts?
Yes, one thing that I have tried to ensure consistently in my voice is whenever I'm talking about a particular piece of literature, I want to place it in its socio-political or cultural context.
If I have to think about books, something like Devdas, the book was written pre 1947, right? And you could, there's Chanda, there's Paro, and there's Devdas, some sort of a landlord. There's a lot of socio political context. But then if I have to pick up a book today, say a Chetan Bhagat book, there's not as much. Maybe some people might not consider it literature per se, but still a lot of books that you see today don't really showcase the socio-political context or sometimes even shy away from it.
No, I would disagree there a little bit because one, if we want to talk about books, right, there is Volga who wrote Vimukta in Telugu, where she reimagines all the women in Ramayana and places them in where they interact with each other. And she brings out the feminist narratives while making use of the female characters in Ramayana, right? Or Ramayana and Mahabharata. Or there is a Yaqub who talks about his own experience as a Dudekula Muslim. And these are very recent and contemporary. I mean, we don't always have to look at poets and writers who are no more and romanticize them as well. But coming to the question of something like a Chetan Bhagat or somewhere Telugu films will stand today, I think they do come from a very specific socio-political context, right? For example, if you take Telugu films, the context in which they are produced from is that there is a certain political class that has sprung up in the recent past, let's say in the past 50 years. So when we talk about Telugu films, who funds these films, who makes these films, what are the narratives that these films carry? There was a time when B.N. Reddy and Chakrapani would make mythological films, because that was the time when India was imagining itself and would rely a lot on framing its own cultural identity, right? So you would rely a lot on your folk stories, your religious stories, and whatnot. And at a later point, there are a lot of middle class aspirations that are captured in our films. Even if you want to take examples of Chiranjeevi's films, right, which has influenced decades of Telugu film industry, they place the have-nots at the center of the films, right? Yeah. Let's say when Chiranjeevi is in a Mutha Mystery, or when there is a film like Coolie, you place the have-nots at the center of the film, and that is the kind of outlook that the films were having at that point of time. So I would still say that they are rooted in socio-political context.
Don't you think it's a little more glossy? Even if you think of some of these movies that you mentioned, fine, there is this person who's not from a very affluent family and there are challenges, but in a way, those challenges are overlooked. They're not really addressed in the movie, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not saying these are great films, or I'm not saying that they are bad films. All I'm saying is that this particular creation, whether it is a film or a book, definitely came from a certain kind of socio-political context. Today, the film industry, the way it works in the kind of dynasties that is there, the way it works in politics, all of these are very quintessential to who we are as a society.
Yeah. If I have to think of my native tongue, which is Telugu, the impression that movies have had on me is a lot more than the books. And I can maybe even generalize it for my generation. Can you figure why this is happening?
For our generation, films were that one big influencer as compared to books. It has to do with multiple factors, right? There was a lot of money that was being pumped into the industry, which meant that there were so many films, which meant that they were accessible. Now, films are something that are accessible to everyone. Literature is not. As much as we would like to talk about the great language that we have inherited, and I would also go to the extent to say that films have obviously suppressed literature in various forms, whether written or oral, right? Today, let's say in Telangana, there are a lot of folk songs that still survive because the film industry has largely overlooked this particular region. But that can't be said in a similar way for, let's say, Uttarandhra region, because they have overtaken a lot of those particular narratives.
Yeah. You did bring up this one point about how literature has taken a backseat, and a lot of it has to do with accessibility, right? So, in a fair world, I think you did mention this earlier, which is around public libraries that you had access to. Would you think a problem like this can be solved through public libraries, democratizing and opening up a lot of this literature online? Or how do you see a solution?
Right. Both. I think there should be access both online and offline. For example, I had access to this particular public library that I would frequent at least thrice in a year, right? But that is not the same case, let's say, in Hyderabad. Most of the localities, if you move away from your Sundaraya Vigyan Kendram or Hyderabad Central Library, if you want to look at a Kukatpalli or a Borbanda or a high-tech city, you don't see the state setting up any public libraries in these regions, or at least I haven't been able to find any. Definitely not in a 4 to 5 kilometer radius for me. So, and to the extent where I can go and spend that particular evening reading something that I would enjoy. I don't think there has been enough focus on public libraries. And this is not a curious case of just Hyderabad. I'm sure this is the case across Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Interestingly, Andhra Pradesh had a very strong library movement, which went hand in hand with the freedom movement. This one particular group started raising funds, setting up libraries in each and every city and sort of creating awareness around the habit of reading, because that's how they saw people, that's where they saw the potential of people being able to engage in the freedom movement as well. But that has also obviously come to a halt at this point.
But if I have to maybe disagree here, I think the Gen Z would rather access the internet than actually walk up to a library. Maybe the need of the hour could be digital libraries, and it would be easier to distribute some of this rather than stepping into a library. I do understand the whole communal side of things, but looking at how people consume content, putting stuff out on the internet would make it a lot more effective than start libraries.
Right. I think once someone enters the online space, I think it is very egalitarian. But having access to an online space is not in the same way, right? When you talk about a certain Gen Z, I don't think it is a very homogeneous group as well, where everyone has access to an online space in the way that we would like them to, that they were also able to spare to reading.
At this point, I want to change course and this passion project of yours. I'd like to know, how do you strike a balance between your day job, which is consulting, and then churning out 2000 word articles?
Right. When I started the page, it was very exciting. So, starting with 2019, I sort of dedicated all my free time to just reading Telugu literature. And I have no regrets about it as well. I'm not very sure if I have any advice as to how to manage it. But luckily, what happened is that I started the Instagram page in 2019, but I would also travel very frequently to Vijayawada, which meant that I spent a good half of that particular year in Vijayawada. So I was in Vijayawada all alone, all my evenings to spare, and there are bookstores and libraries and a lot of history in the town to explore. So I think I really made the most of it there. But generally, I've found myself sort of navigating everything else that I was interested in because of what I was consuming or doing through the page.
Fair. So, at this point of time, once you've gone out of Vijayawada and now that you've hit steady state and the enthusiasm is not as much, how do you strike a balance today?
Right. In a good week, I spend at least one whole day on just doing this.
Yeah. And if I have to ask you something a little more personal, what do you think passion projects give you that work does not?
I can speak from my own experience. It has more to do with the joy of being able to create something or do something that you enjoy. For me, that was reading and analyze what I was reading. It definitely is more satisfying. I'm someone who chose a particular career because I am very passionate about it. So I would not go to the extent of say that, you know what, you do a job for money and then you do something else for your passion. Like you can be passionate about multiple things. Yeah, I think at some level, this gives me unlimited freedom to do what I want to do. There is no deadline. I'm not answering to anyone. I am doing it for me. I think that is what is more important.
The last bit that I wanted to talk to you was about the whole education policy. India just released a new education policy a couple of weeks back. You being someone who spent a lot of time in this particular space, and one of the changes that was mentioned and which was highly controversial was children should be taught in their mother tongue till class 5. How do you comprehend this policy?
This is not a easy question at all, but I think it is important to understand the nuances that are involved in a topic like this. I think the first thing is that language is very personal and hence very political in nature, right? So it is very understandable that a certain kind of attention was given to this particular aspect of the entire policy. I think we should also, I think what is important in trying to understand this particular aspect is the context in which it is in, right? Today, if you go to any private hospital, the doctor writes certain medicines and they will explain that this is what the medicine is for and this is how often you need to take it. It is in English. Or there are many documents that seek comments from the public but are majorly or at times only released in English. Now, there is a certain signaling that this does. I'm not even talking about the aspirational English that one is looking to because they want to get a certain kind of education. Within a particular state, there is a kind of signaling that happens, right? This was not the case many years ago. If you remember an Asha chocolate, for instance, Asha chocolate has multiple languages on its cover. So did Mysore Sandal Soap or even Ambika Darbar Bati or whatever. Now, there is a certain multilingualism that all of these brands took to because they wanted their products to be targeted at people who spoke those languages. Now, that is not the kind of multilingualism that we are seeing today. I think that also comes from a place of affinity for English within the ruling class and the public itself. Because for many, English is a liberating language. It is also true that a kid, especially when they're in the preschool and then when they're looking at foundational literacy and numeracy, they learn best when they're taught in their mother tongue. Now, the mother tongue varies across regions, right? For example, this is not a new policy. For example, in Telangana and Andhra, there are schools which function not just in Telugu and English, but they're Odia medium schools in areas closer to Srikakulam. There are Tamil medium schools in Chittor. There are Kannada medium schools in Anantapur, or there are Marathi medium schools in Telangana. Or even if you walk into a certain Anganwadi where the population is more tribal, the Anganwadi walls might be filled with Telugu, but the teacher will always speak to the kid in that child's language. So it is actually known that a kid learns best when they are taught in their mother tongue, at least during the foundational ages. If I want to address the debate in some sense, then it is a classic case of politics trumps pedagogy. As one would say about any policy that ever comes out, the devil is in the implementation. If you want me to move away from the language aspect of the policy in itself, I would be more concerned about what is the kind of governance capability that is there within the system and what is the kind of academic capability that is there within the system. Because at the end of the day, it is the matchup of these two that is going to affect no matter what the state's vision is. And it also matters what individual states take up as this is what I want this particular generation of kids to become or the next generation of kids to become, and that's how I'm going to design the processes. Right now, AP is toying with the idea of an English medium instruction in government schools as well. We are yet to see how that is going to work out because even within an English medium private budget school, typically they're English medium in the title, but then the instruction happens in Telugu, right? Because teachers recognize the need to communicate with the kid if they want them to learn anything.
True. Do you think policy in general should be a lot more flexible and not rigid? So that would be an answer because you've given me at least 4 different examples, which are in some ways points supporting it as well as counterpoints. So in general, policy should be flexible because you can't just have one policy for the whole of India.
Definitely, and especially in subjects like education or agriculture or health, there is a concept of federalism that comes into play, right? And even within education, it's not like a certain school education department will be able to do everything. You have your social welfare departments looking at education, you have tribal welfare departments looking at education, and all of them have to a certain extent freedom to adjust what they're teaching the kids, right? One example that comes to mind is Jupaka Subhadra, who is a poet. She talks about her experience growing up in Telangana. And she talks about her childhood when the teacher is teaching them about the rivers in India, and then she refers to Ganga as in the Ganga in the north. And then Jupaka Subhadra wondered, there is a Ganga where I am living in as well. Is that not it? And then the teacher scolded her. I think it raises a whole lot of questions about what is it that matters when it comes to the kind of curriculum we are choosing, the kind of pedagogy that we are choosing, and how efficient are we in taking this forward. My concern would be more with that.
And I guess we did discuss on slightly serious topics than literature and language. Maybe end it with an elevator pitch. So if I had to ask you for a 30-second pitch to convince someone to pick up a book in their regional language next, what would yours be?
I think I would generally leave it up to a person's personal choice if they're interested in it or not. But if forced, I would ask someone to read whatever language that is more accessible to them, because it will open their doors to a whole lot of individual, deeply personal narratives, histories, stories that we typically don't have access to sitting in our own bubbles. And it might actually just tell you about who we are as a society. So it's a great segue to understanding the world around us.
Cool. And on this note, I'd like to end the conversation. Thanks a lot, Priya, for being a part of this. And anyone who's heard the podcast would have a lot more context in terms of how art, literature, languages play a huge part in shaping us. And hopefully, the talk has nudged you into open a book which is not in English. So, thanks a lot for being a part of it.